Hello again, and welcome back to Reach Your Dew Point, the podcast that answers the question, what? And today, I had the pleasure of speaking with Alan Berkson, who's, I've known Alan for more years than probably either of us wants to admit, but a long time. And I have always had immense respect for Al. I'm just saying that now because he's here. But we're going to talk about some very interesting stuff having to do with corporate narratives today. And as you know, I usually start off with some snippets from people's LinkedIn profiles, and Alan's got some great snippets. First of all, I'm going to save the first one for last because it's too interesting to throw away up front. Alan says, most companies don't know what business they're really in. I've spent my career running into that problem from different angles. And as you will probably know, Alan, so have I. Same pattern kept showing up. Companies that struggled weren't missing a product or a strategy. They were missing a story. So Alan says in 2011, he started writing about what he called pervasive communications, the idea that social media was a misnomer for something much bigger. Conversations kept leaping across platforms, consumers talking to each other about brands, really important consideration, right? Voice of the customer, as we know. Every stakeholder was becoming a broadcaster. The old playbook of controlling the message was dead. Company needed something much deeper than a tagline to hold it all together. Hence the corporate narrative. And I shouldn't fail to mention the fact that you have a newsletter on LinkedIn that people can subscribe to called The Narrative Intel. Very worthwhile. Comes out every week. Faithfully, you're right on the money as far as that's concerned. So, but now I'm going to jump back to the first thing I talked about, which is that opening snippet from your LinkedIn profile, which says statistically unlikely. Tell me about why you chose to open your LinkedIn profile with that.
Well, first, Roy, thanks for having me on the podcast. Statistically unlikely, because Gen AI generates statistically likely content. That is the nature of how the LLMs work. It's all statistically based. This word should statistically come next. And so I think that where humans fit is they're statistically unlikely.
Absolutely. And recently I was writing something about AI, and I found myself writing the fact that if you look at a normal curve, what AI is really concentrating on is right smack in the middle, not the nose or the tail. And a lot of times that's where the really interesting stuff happens, right? Out there when people are saying things that aren't statistically likely. So thank you for talking about that. It's great. So let's talk about what a corporate narrative is. And you define it in the book, which we should talk about. The book is called The 10 Commandments of Successful Corporate Narratives. It's by you and Jeff Gomez. And we'll talk about Jeff. I would like you to talk about him quite a bit. A very interesting guy. A corporate narrative, as defined in the book, is the ongoing and ever-evolving story that a company tells about itself to itself and to everyone else. So it's not just a mission statement, not just a vision statement. It's not just the tagline, as you said. Tell me more about what are the things that are involved in that corporate narrative.
Well, let me take you back to where the idea came from for me. So my buddy Jeff Gomez has been in the entertainment business in terms of telling stories for a very long time, and he would build these Bibles for story worlds. Pirates of the Caribbean, Men in Black, Avatar, Spider-Man, small franchises. Mm. And the purpose of the Bible was to make sure that everybody was on the same page when they're telling not just one story, but in what he calls a transmedia world, a multi-platform, telling different pieces of the story in different places. You got a television series, you got a comic book, you got a movie. How do you make sure it stays tight? And I thought, well, companies have the same challenge. They've got lots of different people trying to tell a story. And there's a difference between a campaign and a mission statement and a story world and a corporate narrative. And so I thought it was worthwhile to really see if I can articulate what that meant. I got inspired by it. Theodore Levitt wrote a very famous piece for Harvard Business Review. I think it's like 60 years ago now. It was called Marketing Myopia. He's talking about the railroad, so you could tell it was pretty dated. But it's not understanding what business you're in and being able to tell that story. You know, the classic case of it is Blockbuster didn't realize what business they're in. They thought they were in the DVD rental, movie rental business. They weren't. They were in the entertainment delivery business, which is what Netflix came and proved. So understanding what business you're in and then being able to document it, that's what the corporate narrative is all about. Here's an example. If I said to you, Roy, Nike just came out with a new line of water bottles. What do you think those water bottles would do for you?
Obviously, they'd hydrate after sports because that's what Nike is all about, right? It's all
They'd
about
help you with your performance, right? Whatever it is. If they came out with, you know, a chicken sandwich or some food or whatever it is, it would be about, because that's the essence of their brand. And so companies do this all the time. They'll come out with a product and people kind of scratch their heads like, really? Or they'll come out with a campaign and they'll scratch their heads and say, really? So there's some of those that we talk about in the book, but essentially that's the corporate narrative. The whole point is, can we get everybody on the same page? Product, marketing, customer service, finance, you know, leadership, investors, partners, even your customers.
and knowing what I know about Nike, I would already have a slogan for that water bottle, which would be "Just drink it." Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, give me some examples if you can. And there are some really good ones in the book about companies who get it right. Just some quick examples, and maybe a couple of maybe that don't get it so right. If you want to go there,
You want me to call out companies that are doing bad things?
I love to have you call out companies that are doing bad things, but it's up to your comfort level.
So we do have some examples in the book. I think one of the ones that a lot of people may relate to is the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC Cinematic Universe. If you think of Marvel, you think of Iron Man, Thor, Captain America. And for about a 20-year run, they were killing it. Just everything that came out, everything they did was gold. And it's because they really had a very strong through line in terms of, and they followed a lot of the rules that we have in terms of corporate narrative, which is also the same type of rules for building a story world. The story world rules all. Somebody comes in and says, a director of a movie and says, I want to do it differently. And this is what happened in DC. I mean, how many different Batmans have you seen? How many different Supermans have you seen? You know, which is the one that me as a fan or as a consumer can relate to? You know, we talk about campaigns. I've seen this happen in companies that I've worked for. A leader comes in and says, well, this is what I've done before, or I have this great idea for a campaign. It's going to go viral. Okay. Is it aligned with what you want, with your corporate narrative? Will your customers and consumers understand it? Will they appreciate it? And will you be able to build on it, or is it just ephemeral? The whole idea with corporate narrative is you continue to build.
And that makes it consistent across platforms, makes it consistent across time, makes it consistent across, as you say, you know, like product focused campaigns or service focused campaigns. And people get to understand the essence of what makes your organization your organization. How do you see that being an offshoot of or a contributor to corporate culture?
So, and one of the examples I put in the book is Maker's Mark. Uh, they make a premium alcoholic beverage and an aged whiskey. And the challenge with aged whiskey is if you suddenly have a high demand for it, you can't make more right away because it's aged. And so a couple of years back, they had that challenge, and they're a victim of their own success, and they decided to wait for it, dilute it a little bit in order to have some more. And they told all of their customers that you won't notice the difference. As you can imagine, there was an uproar. I mean, there are whiskey fans who won't put ice in their whiskey because that changes the flavor, let alone dilute it a little bit. But that's what they're buying. And so whoever's idea that was didn't understand what business they were in. If you don't have any more, then you just tell your fans, hey, this is, you'll just have to wait. You can't change your product for the bottom line of your business, because that's going to eventually hurt it. In the course of a week, they went from announcing the dilution to a social media storm to backpedaling to finally coming out with an apology. And the apology is something we talk about in the book which we call embracing the narrative reversal. Apology is not hey, we're sorry you felt that way. That's insulting your customers. An apology, hey, you know what? We made a mistake. We understand what the mistake was, and we're taking steps to remedy it. And because in the end, the most important people are you.
There's a short statement in the book relevant to kind of a little bit of a detour from what you were just talking about that really caught my eye, is that do not make war with your customers. And I think we can both name a bunch of organizations that have done that. They've said, no, you're wrong. It doesn't change the flavor of the whiskey, yada, 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 yada. And in that regard, by the way, going back to something that you said, I've been many times to a very old place in New York City called Keen's. They pride themselves on their Scotch collection. They have many, many, many single malt Scotches. They won't put ice in your Scotch. They won't put water in your Scotch. They will serve you a glass of Scotch, and if you want water, they'll put it on the side. They'll give you the ice in a glass on the side. You put it in. We're not doing that. So, but certainly, when you rest your case on something fundamental, and then you change that fundamental thing, you've got a problem. And that's the kind of thing that you talk about in the book. And if you do make war on your customers, and can you describe what happens when you make war on your customers a little bit? What do you mean by that, and what happens if you do?
Simply said, it's telling your customers they're wrong or they're stupid. When Apple said you're holding the phone wrong because you're not getting good, years ago with the iPhone, when you tell your customers it's their fault because of something that they're doing, or you're trying to change the story. And look, this came out with the last 3 Star Wars movies. They changed a little bit of how they told the story. It was less about the Skywalkers and this hero's journey, and it went into this new type of model called collective journey, and that's probably another podcast topic. But the fans got upset because it was not what they were expecting. And somebody in the studio said, well, but this is the story we want to tell. And it's like, well, no, you can't just tell the story you want to tell. You have to tell a story that is consistent with your universe and consistent with what your fans and your customers expect. And if you want to change that, you have to bring them along. You can't just tell them that, hey, you figure it out, or this is better. And, eventually you'll figure that out. It's one thing to say we want to change, but you can't do it unilaterally. You're not the only person in the conversation, and you're not the only stakeholder in the brand.
And I think that's where an awful lot of organizations lose it, don't they? Is not realizing that they're not the only thing. And that's what I usually talk about with inside out, outside in thinking, right? Thinking from the outside in means you're accepting the input and you're accepting the emotional energy that you get from your customers, from your stakeholders. If you're thinking from the inside out, you're only thinking about what's going on inside the organization. What's the bottom line look like? What is the product capacity of the organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And you're not taking that other stuff into account, right? Do I have that right?
Yeah, it's one of the ways to look at it is I've seen this happen so many times in my career. I worked in the software business, the technology business, and we'll hire a senior leader that came from a competitor or another technology business. And what that person thinks about when they come in is, you hired me because of what I did somewhere else. So I'm going to do that here. And there's a lot of challenges with that, Roy. I'm not saying that what they did over there didn't work, but a couple of things come into play. One is, do you even know what you did over there? It's the old adage of, you're on third base and you think you hit a triple, but you didn't build what you did over there. Maybe you ran it. But even if you did build it, your new company, completely different organization, completely different corporate narrative. So how do you, the challenge for that leader is to say, I'm going to listen. I'm going to try to understand how things work here. Now, things do need to change. That's why you hired me. You hired me because you want me to transform or grow or whatever that is. But how do I make that work within the current story world and current corporate narrative, so that I'm not going to war with my customers, that I'm not going to war with any of my stakeholders, my employees, my partners, whoever that is. I've got to find a way to take those super skills that I had somewhere else and apply them here. But where's that? If that's not documented, if that's not somehow put together by the company, how do I know what that is? I have to sort of suss it out.
I've always, and you may have seen me writing about this topic in particular, I've always had an aversion to organizations saying they're going to be the next whatever. We're going to be the next Intel. We're going to be the next Microsoft. We're going to be the next, because you're not. There's only one of them. I think the order of the day is to be the next you, be the next whatever your organization represents and whatever your organization is. And that's how the greater underpinnings of the story help you. I think, if I'm getting that right, if you have that storyline and all the components at your disposal, it helps you build the story of what happens next.
So I did a seminar at a competitive intelligence conference, and I was trying to figure out, how do I apply some of these corporate narrative concepts and rubrics to how do you think about competitive intelligence? If you're competing on price or features or functions, you've lost your narrative because you're trying to play somebody else's game. If you're competing on your story, this is how we see, this is our vision. This is how we see the market. This is why we're building the product. This is where our customers are getting value. This is where our customers get value, not just any customer. This is what we bring to the table. You don't want to play somebody else's game. One of my favorite quotes, Warren Buffett, he's famous for his shareholder meetings and his speeches at his shareholders meeting. A bunch of years ago, he said, I'm paraphrasing, how do you beat Bobby Fischer? And the answer is, you don't play chess. And if you're doing feature, function, competition, price, whatever that is, you're playing somebody else's game. And how this relates to the corporate narrative is, you're defining your game. You're defining what makes you successful, what makes you differentiated, not just today, but going forward. If you're a company, if you think, I worked with a lot of startups, and I always tell them, well, why are you in business? And it's like, well, I saw this challenge in the market. Okay. And but what makes you think that you're in a position to do it? Why is it right for you to all the things that make you successful? Why did you found this? What's the problem space? The market may change, but the perspective that you came into that doesn't. You know, I'll give you an example of where I am now. I work at Contentful. We're a CMS, and when Contentful started, CMSs were this monolithic page based. If you can think of WordPress or Drupal, and this was what let's decouple the presentation layer from the composition layer, and it's an opportunity. That was an idea that was from 2013. That's not the business we're in. We're not in the headless CMS business. We're in the business of helping organizations better manage their content. And today it's agentic. 10 years from now, who knows what it's going to be? But if we keep saying headless CMS, that's just a function. That's a feature. That's a technology, as opposed to a mission for an organizational point of view.
And that idea flows right down the organization too, because as you know, like where I started out was in IT support and customer service, and there's usually a very short-sighted view of what I'm about as opposed to what really impacts the organization as a whole, what makes people productive, what services we deliver, and so forth and so on. And being mindful of those things, asking from that support perspective, what service do we deliver and how consistent is it, is that revolves around that, what business are we in question as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. Look, every part of the organization tells a piece of the story. And wherever it doesn't match, you have dissonance. We're telling you we care about you, but when you call customer service, nobody answers, or it takes a week to get back. That's dissonance. You have a great product, and it's great. Maybe we're making food. It's great ingredients. It's healthy. It's ethically sourced, whatever. But it's got to go throughout the whole organization, and not only that, but it's also got to be with your partners. Maybe they're retail outlets, or maybe they're other service providers, and so that's all part of the story that you're telling. And so that's those are the pieces of the puzzle. When those all come together, there's something we talk about in the book called conducting the orchestra. If there are musicians out there, I know, Roy, I know you are one. If an orchestra is playing, the clarinet, the violin, the tuba, everybody has to be not only on the same. They have to be in the same tempo, the same score, the same keys. If they're playing different stuff, you have noise, you have dissonance, and that's really what corporate narrative is all about. Can we get all the different, let's call them musicians, that are part of an organization, playing in the same and being conducted in the same pace?
So you do talk about some elements of that, and in the book you talk about 3 challenges, which is glass houses, people will talk, and conducting the orchestra. No. So you've talked about conducting the orchestra a little bit. So can you talk about the first 2 a little bit more, glass houses and people will talk?
So when I first came up with the idea of glass houses, social media was new. And there is I'm going back. There was I think it was HMV was there were a record store in Britain, and they were doing a layoff, and the low-level employee or intern who was running their Twitter account was live tweeting while it was happening. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that they're doing this. Wait, now they're saying this. And this is all on HMV's Twitter account. You have, it was about transparency, that you don't have what you can't hide anything. You have this it's going to get out. And so how do you act when you know that everything that you do, all the actions you're going to take, are you live in a glass house? you're not going to be able to cover it up or hide it in the way you might have done it in the past. So it's, how do you think about engaging with all the stakeholders in your business when you know that it's all going to be, you can't hide anything. And look, you probably should do that anyway, but this is just the idea that it's enforced transparency because you can't hide it. So that's glass houses. And then people will talk. Again, this comes down to social media, Reddit, wherever you want to talk about it. You're not the only voice in the conversation about your product, your industry, your geography, whatever it is, your vertical, whatever it is. You're not. There are other voices, and being able to listen and to hear, because you don't want to be tone deaf where people are talking about, hey, here's some challenges in the industry, and you're going off in a different direction, be completely ignorant of that's happening. So it's being aware that you're not just broadcasting to the world, that you have to listen as well. Authentic listening is a term we talk about in the book. And it's not just, hey, I heard what you said, but I heard what you said. I'm going to incorporate it into not only how we communicate, but maybe even how we build the company or build the product.
And the three core elements to talk about there are transparency, as you just said, engagement, being that active listening and participating in the conversation, and proactivity, meaning you probably define it better than I will, but being proactive in terms of anticipating what some consequences might be, are, and making sure that you're prepared to address them.
So there's a formula that I have for trust. How do you build trust in a brand? And those are we call it PET, proactivity, engagement, and transparency. So proactivity is not just waiting for things to happen, but going out and making sure that you're paying attention and being prepared for when something happens. An example was, again, I'm going back. Once upon a time, Kevin Smith was kicked off an airplane, and because they said he was too fat to fly. I'm using his words. I'm not, and he tweeted about it. What the proactivity is in a social media world, in a glass houses world, you have to train your staff differently. An isolated incident on a plane is not an isolated incident on a plane. And I'm not saying that they were wrong to kick him. I won't judge, but just understanding that whatever actions they take will have, and we see it all the time. People, they're at TikTok or YouTube or wherever something ends up, there'll be a video of it. And that's being proactive is training and preparing your organization to manage that kind of stuff. And then the engagement part, we talked about the transparency part, and the engagement part is talking to to people and listening and getting, it's not just I'm broadcasting and telling you what it is. It's taking the input. Users, customers get excited and they create content. Are you trying to shut it down because they're using your brand, or are you trying to find a way to incorporate this or celebrate or validate their participation in the brand? So that would be the elements of engagement. And transparency we just talked about. But if you do all three of those right, every sale in the world was predicated on one thing: trust. I buy that piece of gum. I'm trusting that it'll give me the experience I'm looking for with a piece of gum, or I buy that car, or I buy a house, or I buy that enterprise software. Right? It's about trust. So that's sort of my formula for trust.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it ties right into the whole concept, the Covey concept of the speed of trust. Trust is how business happens, right? So that makes perfect sense in every respect. So one of the things that is in the book is about how AI, which is always and everywhere these days, is emerging as a distinct media platform. Can you help me wrap my brain around that a little bit?
So we've seen media emerge over time. When television came out, the first content that was created for television was really just movies that were put on TV, or radio programs that were put on TV. It took us time to figure out what are the unique properties of television. We came up with, the sitcom and series and, all that kind of stuff. And then when the internet came out, the first content that was put on the internet was basically just translated from other media. It was radio and television. And it took us a while to understand the unique properties of the internet. There's interaction, there's user creativity, there's a whole scaling factor that you have to consider. So eventually we started to create content. Look, YouTube didn't exist before, until the internet, because it created the ability for that unique quality. AI is another media that we can create content with and for, and it has unique qualities. Some of them are interactive. We can have a conversation. I've yelled at Claude and ChatGPT. I'm sure you have too. It's amazing that my blood pressure can get up talking to an LLM. But so and so what we're seeing is how do we create content for this media platform? And I know we talk about, there's e-commerce, can we buy stuff, but eventually there'll be an entertainment and because aspect to it, and it has its own properties. So it's emerging in it, and it's there.
So one of the things that is in the book, again, is FUD. Used to be fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But now you're saying it's full unwanted disclosure, which goes back to things like the Kevin Smith story and the story from behind the scenes that you didn't know somebody was taking video of and putting on TikTok, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So tell me how you try to interact or work with that.
So that goes back to the transparency piece. The challenge is not when something bad is going to happen. I'll cut to the chase. It will. The challenge is, what do you do when it does happen? And there's a concept that my co-author Jeff Gomez calls embracing the narrative reversal, which means leaning in, saying, we accept, we understand what happened. Here's what we did wrong, and here's what we're doing to fix it. But you need to be able to have a narrative that you can say, this was unusual for us. This was unlike us. This is not normal for us, right? And you can't say that unless you have established what normal is, right? So if your customers, your fans, your ecosystem doesn't know what your narrative is, they don't know when you're acting outside of it, and therefore you can't come back and retreat to your narrative saying, yeah, we made a mistake, that is not like us, we're taking steps to fix it, and who we are, and that's not like us. But you can't do that if you haven't established what like us means.
Right. So having a core and developing trust in that core, both within and without the organization, is a huge part of this. And corporate narrative, folks, you're hearing it from the source, Alan Berkson. And Alan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's great to talk to you. We interact online, of course, but it's great to see you. And what else have you got to tell us? You said you had a customer service story.
So I have a customer service joke. Would you like to wait for me to tell you, or would you like to get me that? Would you like me to tell you that joke later?
That's excellent. I love it. Just give me a call back. Send me an email and a survey. So yeah, great stuff. Alan, thanks so much again for being on. The book is 10 Commandments of Successful Corporate Narratives. The authors are Jeff Gomez and Alan Berkson. And thanks again.
Roy, thanks for having me. It's been great.